The sun glared down on Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, baking the tarmac and casting shimmering waves off the rows of parked cars. Inside the bustling terminal, people hugged, laughed, and wiped away tears. Military families clutched homemade signs, "Welcome home, we missed you, proud Army Dad." Among the crowd, one man moved with quiet precision, his camouflage duffel slung over one shoulder. His posture was unmistakable. The squared shoulders, the steady gaze honed by years of combat. His name was Daniel Cole. 30-9, former Special Forces, recently discharged after serving 2 brutal tours in Iran. His dark hair, closely cropped, showed streaks of gray at the temples. Faint scars traced the edges of his jawline, and his green eyes held the wary sharpness of a man who'd seen too much. But beneath the hardened exterior, there was a flicker of something else: anticipation, hope, maybe even a trace of fear. After all, this was supposed to be the good part, the homecoming, the reunion with the family he'd fought to protect. The war had left its mark. His right leg still ached from the shrapnel. Nights were restless, haunted by flashes of sand, smoke, and gunfire. But he'd survived. He'd kept his promise to his wife, to his daughter, Emily, his little girl. She'd just turned 16. Too much of her life was spent waiting for phone calls from distant bases or reading postcards from the desert. He pictured her face, bright smile, stubborn chin, eyes just like her mother's. It was time to be a father again, to be a husband, to reclaim the pieces of his life that war had fractured. His phone buzzed as he exited the terminal. A text from his wife, Rachel: "Welcome home. I'm sorry I couldn't pick you up. Car trouble. Just head straight home. Emily's at school. I'll see you there." Daniel frowned slightly but shook it off. Car trouble? No big deal. After all, life didn't stop just because he'd returned. Outside, the Georgia heat pressed down like a weighted blanket. He hailed a cab, watching familiar neighborhoods roll past: diners, old churches, brick homes with tidy lawns. Everything looked the same, yet somehow, off. His gut, that finely tuned combat instinct, whispered of something wrong. But he pushed the thought aside. An hour later, the cab pulled into his driveway. The house was there, 2 stories, white siding, the porch swing he'd built before his last deployment still creaking in the breeze. But no car in the driveway, no welcome home sign, no balloons, no Rachel. The front door stood ajar. His heart tightened. The soldier in him tensed automatically. He slipped from the cab, duffel abandoned on the lawn, and approached silently. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. Then, faint sounds upstairs, a creaking floorboard, a muffled voice, a low laugh. Daniel's pulse spiked. Years of training kicked in. He moved up the stairs, steps silent, jaw clenched. From the master bedroom, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of Rachel's voice, and a man's. The world tilted. His hand hovered near his waist where a sidearm should be. But this wasn't war, not yet. He pushed open the door and saw everything. The bedroom was exactly as Daniel remembered it. The same cream-colored walls, the oak dresser he'd built with his own hands, the wedding photo perched on the nightstand. But the scene before him made the entire room feel foreign, corrupted. Rachel lay tangled in the sheets, her back arched, skin flushed. Her long, dark hair clung to her damp face, eyes squeezed shut in pleasure. And beside her, a man, tall, muscular, shirtless. His hand gripped her waist, his lips against her neck, laughing softly between gasps. Daniel's world narrowed. His mind didn't process the betrayal all at once. The soldier in him catalogued details automatically. The man's Rolex watch gleamed on the nightstand, a leather holster on the floor, a police bijouterie sting next to it, his wife's soft moan. The man wasn't just anyone. Detective Jason Reed, a name Daniel had heard a dozen times on his brief calls home. His wife's coworker, a friend from the department. The one who helped around the house while Daniel was overseas, the one who checked in for Emily's sake. The bile in Daniel's throat tasted bitter as gunpowder. He didn't speak, didn't shout, just stood in the doorway, silent and still, watching their tangled bodies freeze. As realization dawned, Rachel's eyes snapped open. For a split second, confusion, then horror. Her hand flew to her mouth. Jason Reed lunged for his holster, instincts sharp from years on the force. But Daniel was faster. His hand shot out, kicking the weapon across the floor. "Don't," Daniel said, voice low, controlled, dangerous. Rachel scrambled to pull the sheets over herself, her face palling. Dan, I save it. Jason straightened, chest heaving, lips curling into the smug arrogance Daniel remembered from their forced introductions. Well, guess the war's over, huh? Jason sneered. Welcome home. Daniel's fist clenched at his side. Every muscle screamed for action, but years of combat discipline held him steady. You assaulted my daughter's home, Daniel replied, voice like stone. Slept with my wife. And you think a smart-ass line makes it better? Jason shrugged, feigning casual confidence. But Daniel saw the twitch at the corner of his jaw, the slight tremor in his hand. Look, man, Rachel told me you were gone, that your marriage was dead. That gives you an excuse to play house in my bed. Daniel's tone sharpened, cutting through the room like a blade. Rachel flinched, tears brimming in her eyes. Dan, please, I didn't want what? His eyes locked onto hers. To betray me, to humiliate me, or for me to find out. Her lip trembled, but she said nothing. The old Daniel, the one who built porch swings and dreamed of peaceful evenings, would have broken down, would have begged for answers, but that man had been forged into steel by sand, blood, and fire in the Iranian desert. The soldier inside him only saw strategy now. First, information. Then, containment. Finally, destruction. Daniel's eyes swept the room one last time. The sheets, the badge, the trembling coward, disguised as a detective, and his wife, the woman he'd once trusted with his life. This isn't over, Daniel promised, turning for the door. And this time, it wasn't an idle threat. The front door clicked shut behind Daniel, but the echo of betrayal followed him like a shadow. The quiet suburban street looked unchanged. Well-manicured lawns, American flags fluttering in the breeze, the faint bark of a neighbor's dog. But for Daniel, the entire world had shifted off its axis. He crossed the driveway, boots crunching on gravel, every step methodical. Years of military service taught him how to compartmentalize, how to lock the rage, the heartbreak, the humiliation into a steel box. But even steel had its breaking point. His truck sat where he'd left it, still dusty from the long drive. Home. Daniel climbed in, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. The image of Rachel's flushed face, Reed's smirked, their tangled bodies looped like a cruel film reel behind his eyes. He forced them away. Focus. Prioritized. First, Emily, his daughter, his whole damn reason for surviving that hellhole desert. She wasn't home, probably at school or practice. At least she hadn't witnessed the collapse of their so-called family firsthand. But that wouldn't last long. The walls always talked in a small town. Daniel shoved the keys into the ignition, his mind already mapping the next steps. Information, control, retaliation. The GPS, on his phone, still had their old location saved. The school where Emily practiced. Trekkie started the engine, but before shifting gears, his phone buzzed again. A message. Unknown number, but the text froze him. Welcome home, hero. Guess you're not the only one protecting Rachel these days. Daniel stared at the words. Cold, calculated, mocking. Jason Reed, the coward, wasn't done yet. His thumb hovered over the screen. For a brief moment, the urge to call, to unleash hell over the line, burned hot in his chest. But Daniel had learned a different kind of warfare overseas. The loudest revenge wasn't always the most effective. The best revenge, systematic, silent, inevitable. He tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, shoving the anger back into its cage. Rachel and Reed thought they held the cards, that Daniel was just another broken soldier, too shell-shocked to fight back. They had no idea who they were dealing with. His reputation overseas wasn't built on brute force alone. He planned, he waited, he struck, and now, the battlefield was personal. The targets, closer than ever, but the rules, still the same. Identify, isolate, destroy. Daniel shifted the truck into gear, his blue eyes like ice in the rearview mirror. They wanted to play dirty. They had no idea just how dirty war could get. The high school track field sprawled under the afternoon sun, empty bleachers baking in the heat, the faint whistle of wind drifting across the lanes. Daniel parked at the edge of the lot, engine idling. Beyond the chain-link fence, a group of teenagers jogged warm-up laps, their laughter, the rhythmic thud of sneakers on rubber. The casual energy of youth. It felt like another universe, compared to the war still raging in his chest. But his eyes found her instantly. Emily, 17, now, taller, lean, her dark ponytail bounced behind her as she ran, focused, determined, the same fire Rachel once had, before the lies. Before the rot set in, Daniel's grip on the steering wheel loosened as he watched his daughter navigate the track. She was the only thing in his life untouched by betrayal, or at least she had been. The message from Reed still burned in his mind. The threat wasn't subtle. They wanted to use Emily Twist, her loyalty, poison her against him the way Rachel had been twisted herself. But that wasn't happening. Not on his watch. Daniel killed the engine and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached the fence. Emily noticed him immediately. Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened into a tentative smile as she slowed her pace. "Dad." The word hit harder than he expected. Her voice still carried traces of the little girl he used to tuck in at night, the one who cried when he deployed, who scribbled "Be safe, Daddy" drawings and stuck them on the fridge. Daniel forced a steady breath as she jogged over. "Hey, Em," he greeted, his voice rough from disuse. She threw her arms around him, sweat damp and breathless, but real, solid, his. "When did you get back?" she asked, pulling back, eyes shining. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel's jaw clenched. The simple answer: "Because your mom was busy screwing my best friend," wasn't something she needed to hear. "Not yet. I wanted to surprise you," he lied smoothly. "Came by the house first. Thought we'd all be there." Emily's expression dimmed. "Oh," she hesitated. "Mom's been kinda weird lately." Daniel arched a brow. "Weird how?" Emily shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "She's always working late. And Jason's around, a lot." The name tasted like acid in his mouth, so they weren't even hiding it anymore. Daniel forced his feature resto neutro. "We'll talk about it later," he promised. "But I need you to listen to me, Emily." Listened. Her brows furrowed, concern creeping in. "Be careful what you believe about me. About what people say. Things aren't what they seem." Emily studied him, hesitant, but despite the uncertainty in her eyes, there was trust buried deep. The years of bedtime stories, school pickups, training wheels, scraped knees, those memories still mattered. "Okay," she nodded slowly. "But you'll tell me the truth, right?" Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, reassuring, always, because when the dust settled, when the lies crumbled, she'd need to know exactly who her father was, and who her mother and Jason Reed really were. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. The old two-story house sat like a rotting monument at the end of the cul-de-sac, its white siding faded, the front yard overgrown, the porch light flickering weakly in the approaching dusk. Daniel's boots hit the cracked walkway with measured steps. This used to be home, the place where Emily took her first steps, where Christmas mornings were chaos, where Rachel once burned dinner, and they laughed about it for hours. But tonight, it was a crime scene in waiting. The front door was locked, but Daniel still had his key, the same key he'd carried overseas, tucked in his gear, a reminder of what he was fighting for. It slid into the lock, and stuck. He jiggled it, frowning. It didn't budge. They changed the locks. His jaw tightened. Rachel had planned this, erased him from the home, one subtle step at a time. He knocked hard, 3 times. Moments later, the door creaked open, and Rachel appeared. Her blonde hair was styled, makeup flawless, suburban perfection painted over something rotten. Surprise flashed in her eyes, followed by something colder, calculation. "Dan," she greeted coolly, leaning on the doorframe. "Didn't expect you tonight." He held her gaze unblinking. "Figured we should talk." She hesitated, but only for a second before stepping aside. "Of course, come in." The house interior was pristine. Polished floors, artfully placed throw pillows, fresh flowers on the table, all a stage. But the faint scent of aftershave in the air wasn't his. The expensive cologne, Jason, Reed's favorite. His knuckles whitened as he crossed the threshold. Rachel followed him to the living room, perching on the armrest of the couch like a bored cat. "I assume you've been in town longer than you've let on," she asked, voice laced with faux sweetness. "Long enough," Daniel replied evenly, scanning the room. A Venus and the coffee table. No obvious cameras, but that didn't mean much. Rachel's expression twisted faintly. "Look, Don, I know you're angry, but let's be adults about this." "Adults," he chuckled dryly. "That's what you and Jason were doing. Being adults." A flicker of guilt quickly buried. "It's complicated," she began, defaulting to rehearsed excuses. "You've been gone so long. Emily needs stability. Jason's been sleeping with my wife, Daniel interrupted, voice low, measured, lethal beneath the surface. Rachel's mask cracked, but only for a moment. You left, she shot back. Years of deployments, missions, God knows what. I built this life. I held it together. The audacity made his blood boil. You held it together by screwing my best friend. Rachel stood abruptly, voice rising. You don't understand, Dan. You never. The front door creaked. Heavy footsteps. Jason Reed entered, all smug arrogance wrapped in tailored clothes, keys jangling in his hand. The tension in the room shifted instantly. Ah, look who's back, Reed drawled, eyeing Daniel like a wolf sizing up old prey. Guess they finally let you out of the sandbox. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't need to, because the trap was already closing. This wasn't a confrontation. It was reconnaissance. And they'd just shown him exactly how weak they really were. The air inside the living room thickened with silent hostility. Jason Reed shut the door with deliberate slowness, tossing his car keys onto the side table like he owned the place. For a moment, none of them spoke. Daniel's gaze never wavered. Years in the military taught him how to hold a stare until the other man cracked. And despite the expensive watch and tailored shirt, Jason Reed wasn't built for this kind of tension. You gonna say something? Jason finally sneered, shifting his weight like he might square up. Daniel smiled faintly, cold, unreadable, already said enough. Rachel hovered between them, eyes darting from one man to the other. She opened her mouth to interject, but Reed cut her off with a dismissive wave. Relax, Ratch. He's not gonna do anything. That's the beauty of the situation. He turned to Daniel, voice laced with condescension. See, this, he gestured vaguely around the room. It's all handled. You've been gone, absent, irresponsible, serving my country, Daniel corrected, voice quiet but sharp as broken glass. Jason smirked. Call it what you want. Meanwhile, Ratch needed support. Emily needed stability. You left a vacuum. I filled it. The arrogance was almost impressive. Daniel's pulse stayed steady. His military training, the hours of mental conditioning, insulated him from the fire building beneath his sternum. Let him talk. People like Jason always talk too much. Rachel folded her arms, leaning on the counter now, defensive. It's not ideal, but it's reality, Dan. We can work this out. Quietly, quietly, Daniel echoed, cocking his head. Like you two worked it out, while I was halfway across the world. Jason's smirk widened. You're a soldier, man. You understand strategy. We planned this right. Paperwork's ready. Lawyers lined up. Custody agreements favor Rachel House hers. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like he was sharing a private joke. Best you can do now is walk away with what little dignity you've got left. Daniel said nothing, but inside, gears were turning. Custody agreements. Lawyers. They were further along than he expected. This wasn't an affair born from impulse. It was a hostile takeover. But they underestimated one critical thing. Daniel wasn't just a soldier. He was trained in patience, deception, psychological warfare, and he had one more asset they didn't account for. Emily, their daughter. The real prize in this twisted chess game. Jason straightened his posture, confident now. So, you gonna make this easy, or do we have to play rough? Daniel's lips twitched, not in amusement, but in quiet, predatory satisfaction. Play however you want, he said coolly, turning toward the door. But remember one thing. Jason raised an eyebrow. Daniel's eyes, cold and unblinking, locked onto his. I've been trained my whole life for wars just like this. And then, without another word, he walked out. The battlefield wasn't the living room. It was everything that came next. And they were woefully unprepared. The cool night air slapped Daniel's face as he stepped off the porch and into the driveway, his boots crunching over the gravel like the measured march of inevitability. He wasn't angry. Anger clouded judgment. What he felt now was something far colder, calculated, surgical. Standing beneath the flickering street lamp, Daniel pulled out his phone, the same battered device that had survived sandstorms, mortar fire, and freezing desert nights. He scrolled past missed calls, ignored voicemails, and landed on a single name, Sergeant Mason Grant. The man owed him more than one favor. The line rang twice. Reed's in play, Daniel said without introduction when Mason answered. His voice was as steady as ever, the voice of a soldier who'd seen it all. I need intel, fast, financials, associates, skeletons in the closet. There was a pause on the other end. Then, copy that. The call ended, no questions, no hesitation. Mason knew. This wasn't about bruised pride, it was war. Daniel's eyes flicked back toward the house, the one he paid for, built dreams in, bled for, now compromised. It wasn't just the bricks and mortar that were tainted, it was the foundation, the trust, the family. But he wouldn't storm the gates recklessly, no, he'd dismantle them quietly, methodically. As he slid into his truck, a text appeared from an unknown number. "We warned you to stay gone. Now stay smart." The message reeked of Jason's arrogance, or worse, allies Daniel hadn't accounted for yet. His jaw clenched, but the corner of his mouth curved upward, a soldier's smile. Let them bluff. Let them think he'd play by civilian rules. This wasn't family court anymore. It was a battlefield dressed up in polite society, and Daniel Reed, he didn't lose battles, not when his daughter's future was at stake. Turning the ignition, he pulled out onto the darkened street, headlights slicing through the quiet suburban night. This wasn't over, it was barely beginning, and by the time he was finished, Jason Reed, Rachel, every accomplice, would learn exactly what happened when you tried to bury a soldier alive. The next morning, Daniel sat at the kitchen table of his temporary apartment, a place that still smelled of fresh paint and sterile emptiness. A single lamp illuminated the documents spread before him, printouts, emails, transaction histories. Mason had delivered. Efficient as always. Jason Reed's entire polished, smug life lay bare in a neat folder. On paper, Jason was successful. A regional manager at a logistics company. Nice salary, clean tax returns. But Daniel knew better. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the unexplained cash infusions, and Rachel's name. It was there, buried deep in the paperwork. Joint account activity, property transfers, wire transactions to a bank in the Cayman Islands. Signed just days before Daniel's scheduled return from deployment. His fists curled. They'd been planning this long before his boots even touched American soil. The affair was just the surface. This was financial warfare, a calculated betrayal designed to strip him clean reputation, assets, even custody of his own daughter. But they underestimated one thing. Daniel wasn't the naive, predictable family man they remembered. He'd spent years in the shadows of Fallujah, Mosul, and Busra, learning how to dismantle enemies quietly, surgically, without leaving fingerprints. As he traced the paper trail, his phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "Dad, I heard Mom fighting with Jason last night. I don't know what's happening, but I'm scared. Can we talk?" The text cut deeper than any of the numbers or legal jargon. Before him. Lily. His daughter. The only part of his life untouched by the Lees until now. Daniel's jaw tightened. He tapped a quick reply. "Stay strong, sweetheart. I'll fix this. I promise." He would. But not with lawyers. Not with threats. With the kind of quiet, merciless precision they taught in war zones. The first crack had appeared. Jason's facade of control, Rachel's smokescreen of domestic bliss, were fraying at the edges, and Daniel, he was done being the victim in their narrative. It was time to flip the script. That afternoon, Daniel parked 2 blocks away from a nondescript office building on the outskirts of town. The windows were tinted, the sign generic Atlas Investigations, but Daniel knew better. Inside worked the people who dealt with the messes that lawyers were too scared to touch. Mason had set it up. Back entrance, 2nd floor. Mason had texted earlier. "They're expecting you." Daniel moved through the alley like muscle memory, eyes scanning corners, steps light on the cracked pavement. His time overseas taught him that trouble often lurked where people least expected it. Inside the building, the hum of cheap fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Down the hall, behind an unmarked door, Mason waited, flanked by 2 others. "Daniel," Mason greeted, gesturing to the table. The others were already seated. An older woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, Susan Grant, a forensic accountant with a reputation for making hidden money trails impossible to ignore, and a younger man with a wiry frame and tech gear spread in front of him, Caleb Ortiz, thickened-off cybersecurity specialist who could dismantle a digital footprint in minutes. "This is your team," Mason explained. "If you want to hit them where it hurts, they're how you do it." Daniel sat, scanning the files they'd laid out. Property records. Bank statements, surveillance reports. Photos of Jason Reed, leaving upscale restaurants, cozying up to Rachel at the same lakeside cabin Daniel once bought as an anniversary gift. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough. I want more than humiliation, Daniel stated flatly. I want them exposed. Publicly. Legally. I want them stripped clean. Susan nodded, flipping through documents. Jason's been laundering money through shell companies tied to defense contracts, she explained. Illegal, messy, but traceable. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He's using my industry, my brothers-in-arms, to fund his lifestyle. Caleb chimed in, tapping away at a laptop. And your wife's been helping? Her name's on at least 3 of the shell companies. Quiet power of attorney granted during your last deployment. Daniel's pulse quickened, but his face remained stone. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet wound. But now he had the blueprint to destroy them. I want everything, Daniel said coldly. Every hidden account, every dirty deal, every skeleton in their closet. Mason smiled faintly. Good, because by the time we're done, they won't just lose money, they'll lose everything. The sun hung low over the quiet suburbs as Daniel pulled into his driveway, the same house he'd built, brick by brick, over the years. The same house Rachel now polluted with her lies. It felt like a crime scene. Inside, the air reeked of lavender candles, Rachel's poor attempt to mask the tension that thickened every room. Framed photos still lined the walls, wedding pictures, family trips, the illusion of a perfect life. But Daniel saw them differently now. A gallery of betrayal. Rachel emerged from the kitchen as he stepped through the door. You're home early, she remarked, voice laced with false sweetness. Daniel shrugged off his jacket, his face unreadable. Busy day wrapped up faster than expected. She hovered near the countertop, nervously rearranging a bowl of fruit. The silence stretched taut between them. How's Ava? Daniel asked, his tone carefully neutral. Rachel's mask slipped, momentarily surprise flickering across her face. She's fine, staying at Emily's tonight. Convenient, Daniel thought. Their daughter is gone, no witness to what came next. Rachel forced a brittle smile. You've been quiet lately, distant. We should talk. Daniel studied her, the polished facade, the cautious eyes. He knew the dance. Manipulation wrapped in concern. We should, he agreed flatly. But not now. He moved past her, the muscles in his jaw flexing as his eyes lingered on a new bottle of expensive wine on the counter. Jason's brand. A brand Daniel never drank. She was sloppy now, sloppy and desperate. Upstairs, Daniel entered the master bedroom, the place where Rachel once whispered promises, now contaminated by lies, on her dresser. An unlocked phone buzzed with a notification. Can't wait to see you tonight. Daniel's pulse stayed steady, his training overriding the visceral flash of rage. It wasn't the message that angered him most, it was how predictable they were. Downstairs, Rachel's voice called faintly, dinner's almost ready. Daniel slipped the phone back into place, his mind already cataloging every next step. The game was in motion. And Jason Reed, he had no idea he was walking straight into the lion's den. Daniel straightened his shoulders, his expression unreadable as ever. Tonight, he played the faithful husband a little longer. Tomorrow, the fault lines would break wide open, and when they did, nothing would protect them from the storm coming. Jason Reed adjusted his cufflinks in the rearview mirror, flashing himself that same cocky smile Daniel had seen 100 times. The polished businessman. The successful executive. The man who thought he could slither into another man's home and bet and walk away untouched. Daniel watched from a distance, parked inconspicuously across the street, his military instincts kicking in as he observed Jason stroll up the front steps of his house. Daniel's house. Rachel opened the door, in a silk robe. Her fake laughter drifted through the evening air as Jason leaned in, pressing a kiss to her cheek like they were the king and queen of some pathetic little kingdom. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but his breathing stayed steady. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about precision. He let them disappear inside before pulling away, his truck rumbling softly as he headed across town. The storage unit was small, tucked behind an industrial complex on the edge of town, the kind of place people stored old furniture or forgotten junk. But for Daniel, it was an operations center. Inside, maps covered the walls. Photos. Documents. Bank records, phone logs, every piece of information he'd quietly gathered in the last few weeks. Jason's real estate empire, built on shady shell companies and sweetheart government contracts. Rachel's credit cards, new purchases that didn't match Daniel's salary, jewelry, hotel stays, expensive dinners. And then there was the most important file of all, custody papers, signed quietly by Daniel's lawyer, prepared meticulously for the day he took Ava, and walked away from this mess for good. He opened his laptop, pulling up the security camera feed he'd hidden inside the house weeks earlier. Jason lounged on Daniel's couch, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. Daniel's whiskey as Rachel curled beside him. The arrogance burned in Daniel's chest, but he forced it down. Let them enjoy it, he muttered to himself. It's their last night playing house. A notification pinged on the laptop, an encrypted message from his old military buddy, Frank. Intel confirms. Jason's laundering money through development contracts. Paper trails solid. Your lawyer can bury him. Daniel allowed himself a thin, grim smile. Piece by piece, it was all coming together. By tomorrow, Jason Reed wouldn't just lose his mistress, he'd lose his empire, his reputation, his freedom, and Rachel, she'd lose everything she thought she was entitled to. Daniel shut the laptop, his eyes hard as steel. The web was tightening. And by the time they realized it, escape would be impossible. The morning air was crisp as Daniel parked outside his attorney's office downtown. The glass building reflected the pale sunlight, clean and professional, the opposite of the storm brewing beneath Daniel's calm exterior. Inside, Sarah Whitmore was already waiting. His lawyer sharp, meticulous, with the kind of ruthlessness Daniel respected. She slid a folder across the sleek wooden table as he sat. Everything's ready, she said without preamble. Custody paperwork, emergency financial orders, restraining order draft just in case. Daniel flipped through the documents, each page another nail in the coffin of the life Rachel and Jason thought they could build on the ashes of his. Sarah's voice dropped. More personal now. You sure about this? Once you pulled that trigger, there's no going back. Daniel met her gaze, his eyes cold, resolute. They already pulled the trigger. Sarah, I'm just finishing what they started. She nodded, understanding. A few signatures later, the legal framework was in place. All that remained was the execution. As he left the building, Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Ava. Hey Dad, you coming to my game tonight? The words pierced through the armor around his heart. Through all of this, the betrayal, the manipulation, the lies, his daughter still looked to him, still needed him, wouldn't miss it for the world. He texted back, and he meant it. But first, there was unfinished business. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel returned home, not skulking in the shadows this time. No surveillance, no waiting. This time, he walked through the front door. Jason's car was in the driveway. The house reeked of expensive cologne and entitlement. Rachel's laughter echoed from the kitchen, fading abruptly as Daniel stepped into view. The room fell silent. Jason froze, a drink halfway to his lips. Rachel's face drained of color. Daniel's presence filled the space like a loaded weapon. We need to talk, he said, voice steady, quiet but carrying the weight of authority that came from leading soldiers into battle. Jason recovered first, smirking that same rehearsed, smug expression. Daniel, you should have called. This is awkward. Daniel ignored him, eyes locked on Rachel. How long? Her lips parted, excuses already forming, but he cut her off with a raised hand. No lies, no performances. How long? Rachel swallowed hard. Months, she admitted, finally, her voice small. Jason chuckled. Look man, let's not make this ugly. Be an adult. Before he could finish, Daniel dropped the manila envelope on the table with a heavy thud. Bank records. Affair evidence. Legal filings. Jason's face paled as he sifted through the damning proof. Rachel's hands trembled. Daniel straightened. This is me, being an adult. Jason's smugness vanished, replaced by dawning fear. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Daniel's voice softened, lethal in its quiet finality. Pack your things. You've got an hour, or you're both done here. Rachel didn't argue. For the first time in years, Daniel saw genuine fear etched across her features. The performance mask cracked, slipping. Jason, however, wasn't as smart. The younger man's bravado flared like a cornered animal. You don't scare me, old man, he spat, straightening his jacket. You think some paperwork's gonna fix this? You walk out that door, I'll still be here, in her bed, in your house. Daniel smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that held the quiet confidence of a man who'd stared down enemy gunfire and survived. You really think this is about paperwork? Jason faltered, uncertainty creeping into his cocky stance. Daniel stepped closer, his presence suffocating the room. I fought in deserts you can't even pronounce, watched good men die, buried friends because people like you thought they were untouchable. His voice dropped lower. But guess what? They weren't. Jason's smirk withered. The front door creaked open behind them. 2 sheriff deputies stepped inside, uniforms, crisp eyes scanning the room. Rachel's breath hitched. Jason's face turned. Sheet-white dot. One officer held up a legal document. Mr. Walker, we're here to enforce the emergency occupancy order. These individuals, he gestured to Rachel and Jason, are required to vacate the premises immediately. Daniel inclined his head politely. Appreciate your prompt response. Rachel turned to him, panic rising. You called the cops on me. Daniel's gaze was ice. No, Rachel. I called them for Ava. Her name landed like a slap. Rachel's face crumpled, realization sinking in. The other deputy approached Jason. You can leave quietly, sir, or we can escalate. Your call. Jason's cocky exterior shattered completely. Within 15 minutes, they were gone, suitcases worthlessly stuffed. Rachel's designer bags. Jason's smugness backed away with his clothes as the squad car disappeared down the street. Daniel stood alone in his living room, the remnants of his former life still lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. Silence. For the first time in months, it was his again. The house, the space, the future. But it wasn't over. Not yet. He pulled out his phone, opening the folder Sarah had sent earlier. Financial forensics. Jason's offshore accounts. Rachel's secret withdrawals. There was more rot beneath the surface than even he'd guessed. And Daniel Walker. He intended to cut it all out. Daniel spent the next 2 hours dissecting the files. Years of hidden transactions unraveled before him. Shell companies, property deals, offshore accounts tucked away in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, even Singapore. Rachel hadn't just betrayed him emotionally. She'd been siphoning money for years. The mortgage overpayments, the investment properties, she insisted, were in his name. All lies. Jason's fingerprints were everywhere. 2. Bank statements linked him to a web of fraudulent businesses, real estate flips that never existed, consulting contracts paid for with Daniel's hard-earned savings. They'd planned it meticulously, bleed him dry, rip apart his reputation, replace him entirely, but they'd underestimated the quiet, methodical patience that 20 years in uniform taught a man. Daniel leaned back in his chair, tapping his phone. Sarah, he said when she answered, good work on the financials. I'm just getting started. Her voice came crisp and efficient through the line. That fake LLC they set up, it's laundering money through a charity front. Classic amateur hour. How deep does it go? Deep enough for federal charges. If we push it. Daniel considered that he could expose them, torch their little empire, but vengeance wasn't his only priority anymore. There was Ava. Her life, her stability. And dragging her mother through a public scandal might only make things worse for her. No, this needed to be surgical, targeted. Daniel didn't want Rachel humiliated. He wanted her powerless. He didn't want Jacinto be embarrassed. He wanted him erased. Sarah spoke again. There's another angle, Danny. That trust fund your dad set up for Ava, the one you never touched after the divorce. Daniel's jaw tightened. What about it? Rachel's been trying to access it illegally. The words snapped something inside him. That money was for his daughter, his little girl's future, his promise to her, untouched, protected. And now Rachel, in her greed, was clawing for it too. Daniel's voice turned cold. Can we stop her? Already done. Sarah paused, then added, but if you want to go further, I can make sure they both drown in legal quicksand. Quietly, no headlines, no cops knocking on Ava's door. Daniel stared at the ceiling for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down. Do it. For Ava. For every sleepless night. For the soldier inside him who refused to be a victim. As he ended the call, his phone buzzed again. Ava's name lit up the screen. Her voice was soft, hesitant. Dad, can I come home? Daniel's heart clenched. It's your home too, baby girl, he replied, and this time, it would stay that way. The next morning, the air over Denver carried that biting autumn chill. Daniel had always loved the kind that crept under your collar and made your instincts sharper, but today, he barely noticed it. He stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee machine, the same one Rachel had insisted they buy for aesthetic purposes. It sat there sleek and modern, like every other facade in his life, designed to look good, to hide the cracks beneath. Footsteps approached. Ava. She padded into the kitchen, hair still damp from her shower, oversized hoodie hanging off her slim frame. Daniel's chest tightened. She looked so much like her mother at that age. But there was something harder in Ava now, a resilience born not from genetics, but from the betrayal they'd both endured. You didn't sleep, she observed, her voice quiet but sure. Daniel poured himself a coffee. Neither did you. Ava offered a faint, sad smile. They sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken tension of the past week thick between them. Finally, Ava spoke. You're going after them, aren't you? Daniel sipped his coffee, weighing his words. I don't have much choice. Ava toyed with the sleeve of her hoodie, eyes downcast. Mom keeps texting me, telling me it's all a misunderstanding, that you're dangerous, that I should stay away from you. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rachel had always been good at playing the victim, but the mask was slipping. I never wanted this for you, he admitted. You deserved better than two parents locked in a war. Ava met his eyes then, her gaze steadier than he expected. I'm not a kid, Dad. I see her for what she is now. Her voice cracked for the first time. I don't want to choose sides. Daniel exhaled slowly. The hardest battles weren't fought overseas, they happened right here, in the quiet moments in kitchens, living rooms, lawyers' offices. I get it, he said softly, but this isn't about sides, it's about survival. Ava nodded, swallowing hard. So, what happens now? Daniel set down his coffee. His eyes, once dulled by grief, burned with cold determination now. I end it. Before Ava could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. The files are prepped. The lawyers are ready. All we need is your word. Daniel turned the screen toward his daughter. Her future wasn't going to be decided by Jason's greed or Rachel's lies. It was going to be built on truth, on loyalty. And for the first time in months, Daniel felt a spark of hope flicker to life. Want to come with me? He asked gently. Ava hesitated for only a heartbeat, then nodded. Yeah, I'm done hiding. As they grabbed their coats and stepped into the crisp morning air, Daniel knew the battle wasn't over, but this time, they were fighting it together. The upscale law firm downtown looked more like a luxury hotel than a battleground. Glass walls, marble floors, polished chrome fixtures reflecting the city skyline. But to Daniel Walker, it was enemy territory. He and Ava walked through the revolving doors together, their footsteps echoing with quiet resolve. The receptionist barely looked up. Mr. Walker, they're expecting you. Of course they were. Rachel thought she'd won. Jason probably thought Daniel would come here, tail between his legs, to accept their little settlement. They had no idea what was coming. Ava squeezed his hand briefly as they rode the elevator to the 21st floor. Her presence grounded him. Her trust fueled him. They stepped into the glass-walled conference room, where the players waited. Rachel sat at the head of the table, immaculate as ever designer dress, perfect hair, expression rehearsed in 1,000 mirrors. Jason lounged beside her, smug, self-assured. His lawyer, a sharp-faced man with expensive shoes and predatory eyes, glanced over the paperwork. Daniel's own lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, stood at the far end, calm, unreadable, the folder of evidence clutched in her hand. Rachel's gaze flicked to Ava first, softening with artificial warmth. Sweetheart. Ava didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't say a word. Daniel took the empty seat across from Rachel, his posture casual, but every nerve sharp as a blade. Let's get this over with, he said flatly. Jason chuckled under his breath. No, small talk, Walker. I figured you military types had better manners. Daniel's eyes barely shifted. You'd be surprised what we're capable of. Rachel cleared her throat, sliding a stack of legal documents across the table. We're offering a clean divorce. You keep your pension, your truck, your tools. The house, obviously, stays with me. And Ava, her voice faltered slightly on the last part. Aware now of Ava's cold silence, Daniel didn't touch the papers. Instead, Sarah set her folder down, flipping it open. Photos, bank records, correspondence, emails, hidden account statements. Rachel's face drained of color as each page turned. Jason's smug expression withered. What is this? Rachel demanded, voice cracking. Sarah's tone was razor-sharp. Proof of conspiracy to defraud a military veteran, evidence of asset concealment, financial fraud, document forgery, not to mention child endangerment. Rachel's lawyer paled. his confident posture shrinking visibly. Jason's voice wavered. This is entrapment, it's justice. Daniel cut in, his voice low, lethal. The room seemed to contract around them. Rachel's hands trembled as she flipped through the evidence. Jason's jaw clenched, the facade cracking. If this goes to court, Sarah continued, you'll both lose everything. Your businesses, your reputations, possibly your freedom. Rachel's eyes darted to Ava, desperate honey. I didn't mean. Ava's voice, steady, cut through the tension. You meant every word, every lie. You chose him. Silence. Daniel pushed a final document across the table. Here's the deal, he stated. You sign over the house, you disappear. No custody battle, no lawsuits, no jail time, for now. Rachel's lower lip quivered. Jason opened his mouth, but closed it again, defeated. It took less than 2 minutes for them to cave. The signatures hit the paper, the trap snapped shut, and as Daniel stood, Ava beside him, he knew the first battle was over, but the war for their future had only just begun. The rain fell in cold sheets as Daniel and Ava left the law firm. For the first time in weeks, Daniel breathed without the weight of lies pressing on his chest. The documents were signed. The house was his. The threat of custody, games, or public humiliation neutralized. But there was no victory parade waiting. Only the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd dismantled their plan and walked away stronger. They climbed into his truck, the hum of the engine cutting through the patter of rain. Ava buckled her seatbelt, her eyes distant as the city blurred past the window. She looked scared. Ava finally said, her voice quiet but steady. Daniel nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. She should be. A pause. Did you mean what you said about no jail, for now? Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. For now. Ava didn't press. She didn't need to. She understood. This wasn't over. The house, their home, was a victory, yes, but Rachel and Jason's rot went deeper than forged documents and whispered betrayals. Jason's business, Rachel's hidden connections, the money laundering Daniel had only begun to untangle. The fallout was coming, and they wouldn't be ready for it by the time they reached the house. The rain had eased to a drizzle. Daniel paused at the curb, staring up at the familiar structure. The porch light flickered. The windows glinted with rainwater, but his place felt different now. No longer a war zone, no longer a shrine to broken promises. A canvas. We can repaint her room, Ava offered, as if reading his thoughts. Daniel smiled faintly. We can do anything we want now. Inside, the house smelled stale like dust, cheap wine, and the faint remnants of Jason's expensive cologne. Daniel moved through the rooms, like clearing a battlefield. He gathered what Rachel had left behind: the photos, the jewelry boxes, the fake designer purses, and tossed them unceremoniously into a black garbage bag. In the master bedroom, the bed still bore the imprint of betrayal. Daniel stripped the sheets, dumped them beside the garbage bags, and opened the windows wide, letting the rain-scented air cleanse the space. You okay? Ava's voice came from the doorway. Daniel turned, his gaze softening. Are you? Ava hesitated, then nodded. I am now. They worked side by side for hours, purging, scrubbing, reclaiming. By midnight, the house looked raw but clean. The scars of Rachel's lies still lingered in faint outlines, but so did possibility. Daniel stood in the doorway of Ava's room, watching her unpack her sketchbooks, her clothes, her quiet resolve. This wasn't the life he imagined returning to after the desert, but it was real. It was theirs, and he'd fight like hell to protect it. Get some sleep, he told her, his voice low but sure. Tomorrow, we finish what they started. Outside, the rain finally stopped, but for Rachel, for Jason, and for every snake tangled in their web, the real storm was still coming. Morning arrived with a hard edge. The sun cut through the blinds like a searchlight, but Daniel was already awake. He'd been up since before dawn, sitting at the dining table, reviewing files, bank records, and legal loopholes. Jason and Rachel had believed he would stop at the house, that taking back his home and his daughter would satisfy him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They stole years from me. I'm going to take everything from them. Ava entered the kitchen, her hair still damp from a quick shower, a quiet but steady presence. Do you want coffee? She asked, moving toward the kettle. Daniel looked up, studying his daughter. Not the scared girl who once doubted him, but the young woman who had chosen to stand by his side. I want you to know what happens next isn't going to be pretty, he warned. Ava met his gaze without flinching. You're not doing this alone. I've been part of this since the day I found that envelope. Daniel nodded, something proud flickering in his chest. Then let's finish it. His first stop was the private investigator's office, a man named Marshall with thick glasses and a penchant for finding things people desperately wanted to hide. Daniel had hired him weeks ago to track Jason's off-the-books dealings. Marshall slid a folder across the desk. You were right. Jason's been laundering money through multiple shell companies tied to a construction project downtown. He's been siphoning funds and bribing city officials. It's all here. Daniel flipped through the documents, each page a nail in Jason's professional coffin. And Rachel. Marshall smirked. The condo she told you she bought with savings. Turns out Jason bought it for her under a dummy corporation. Their financials are so entangled, when one burns, they both burn. Perfect. Daniel's next move was a carefully crafted letter to the district attorney's office, anonymous, detailed, irrefutable. He included copies of the financial records, the real estate fraud evidence, and screenshots from Jason's private server painstakingly accessed by Ava's tech-savvy friend, Kyle. The final touch. A timed email, scheduled to be sent to the local news if any attempt was made to suppress the charges. Daniel wasn't just burning their empire, he was sowing the seed. By noon, he parked outside Jason's office building. The cast on Jason's arm had been removed, but the sling remained a constant reminder of the day Daniel broke him. Daniel entered the lobby, his boots heavy against the marble floor. Jason's assistant looked up, startled. You can't. Daniel raised a hand, silencing her. Jason's office door swung open. His face paled the moment he saw Daniel. What are you doing here? You got your house. You got your kid. What else do you want? Daniel stepped closer, calm but deadly. I want you to lose. Publicly. Completely. Irreversibly. He dropped a brown envelope onto Jason's desk. The DA's office will be contacting you soon. They know everything. The laundering, the kickbacks, the shell companies. You should prepare. Jason's bravado cracked. You can't prove anything. I don't have to. You left the trail. You always do. Jason's jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward his phone like he wanted to call someone, anyone. Daniel leaned in. Run if you want. It won't matter. The wheels are already turning. Jason's voice dropped to a pathetic whimper. Rachel will never forgive you. Daniel's laugh was low, cold. Forgiveness. She doesn't even forgive herself. He turned to leave. Enjoy the view while you can. The fall's going to be spectacular. As Daniel stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed. A text from Ava. Mom just called me. She's panicking. Wants to meet. Daniel's reply was instant. Set it up. One last conversation. The war was almost over, but there was one final battle to fight. The cafe Rachel had chosen was far from discreet, a trendy, glass-walled coffee shop in the city's upscale district, a place where lawyers, executives, and polished socialites came to be seen. Typical. Daniel parked across the street, observing the scene through the windshield. Rachel sat alone by the window, sunglasses perched on her head, a latte untouched in front of her. She looked good, polished, expensive, but the carefully crafted image cracked at the edges. Her hands trembled as she scrolled her phone. She's unraveling. Good. Daniel waited a moment, savoring the view. Then he stepped out of the truck. Ava met him on the sidewalk, her expression unreadable. You sure you want to do this? She asked. Daniel's jaw tensed. It's not about want, it's about closure. Ava nodded. Following him into the cafe, Rachel spotted them instantly. The mask slipped, the wide eyes, the barely concealed panic, the way her nails dug into her palm. Daniel pulled out a chair across from her. Rachel, she cleared her throat, forcing composure. Daniel, Ava, thank you for coming. Ava remained standing, arms crossed. Daniel sat, calm, controlled, cut to the point. Rachel's lips parted, and words caught in her throat for a moment. Then, it came, her voice low, cracking beneath the weight of desperation. You win. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That easy? Rachel looked down, swallowing hard. The house, the money, even Jason. You've destroyed everything. Daniel tilted his head. I didn't destroy it, Rachel. You did. You built your life on betrayal. I just exposed the cracks. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. I made mistakes. Mistakes. Daniel scoffed. Cheating on your husband while he was deployed. Letting our daughter find out that way. That's more than a mistake. Ava's voice cut in, cold and sharp. And what about letting Jason's thugs toss me down the stairs? That's a mistake too. Rachel flinched, finally showing a sliver of shame. I didn't know they would hurt you. You didn't care, Ava snapped. Rachel's shoulders sagged. For a moment, the room fell silent beneath the hum of espresso machines and quiet conversation. Finally, Rachel exhaled, defeated. I want to fix this, somehow. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low, steady, final. There's no fixing this. You made your choice, and now, you live with the consequences. Rachel's eyes flicked between them, desperate. Ava, please. I'm still your mother. Ava's jaw clenched. A mother who watched me bleed and did nothing. Who picked him over me. Rachel opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. Daniel stood. Here's how this goes, he said, pulling a document from his jacket. You signed the divorce agreement. You waive any claims to the house, the savings, everything. You disappear. You rebuild your life far from ours. Rachel's hands shook as she scanned the papers. And if I don't, Daniel's expression turned ice cold. I bury you legally. Every illegal transfer, every shady deal, every text, every photoet, all goes public. You'll lose what little dignity you have left. Rachel's eyes filled, her voice barely a whisper. I never hated you, Daniel. No, you just loved yourself more. He placed a pen on the table. Rachel hesitated, done. With trembling fingers, she signed. Ava's shoulders lifted as if a weight slid off. Daniel collected the papers, slipping them into his jacket. Goodbye, Rachel. Ava lingered, staring at the woman who had once been her whole world, now a stranger. I hope you find peace, Ava said softly. But you'll never be part of my life again. With that, they turned and left outside. Daniel let the cool air fill his lungs. You okay? He asked. Ava slipped her hand into his. I'm with you now. That's all that matters. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. It was done. The war. The betrayal. The fight. It was over. One final step remained, building the life they deserved. 6 months later, the morning sun poured through the wide windows of their new home, a modest 2-story house nestled in the quiet hills outside town. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, paid for, no ghosts in the walls, no shadows of betrayal. Daniel stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching Ava unload the last box from her car. Need help, he called, voice light for the first time in what felt like years. Ava grinned over her shoulder. I've carried worse in the Corps. Daniel chuckled. Pride swelled in his chest every time he looked at her, the quiet strength, the steady resolve in her eyes. His daughter wasn't just surviving the storm. She'd walked out of it stronger than ever. They had both earned this peace. The months since Rachel signed the papers had been complicated. Rachel had disappeared from their lives. Last Daniel heard, she'd moved to Nevada, working some low-level administrative job, far from the real estate circles and luxury she once flaunted. Jason, a ghost. Word was, after the IRS seized his assets and the organized crime investigation closed in, he fled the country. Good riddance. Daniel never lifted a finger. The truth, the consequences, had been punishment enough. Instead, he focused on rebuilding. The small security firm he'd launched was thriving. His military background, his reputation for integrity, they attracted steady clients. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Work that let him sleep at night. And Ava. She was enrolled in college again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Criminal justice, of course. Like father, like daughter. The scars lingered, visible and invisible. But scars were reminders of pain and survival. As Ava carried the last box inside, Daniel followed, surveying the quiet home. The hardwood floors, the fresh paint, the framed photos already on the walls. Him in uniform. Ava at graduation. Snapshots of camping trips and fishing weekends that told the real story of their family. A family built on loyalty, not blood alone. His phone buzzed. A text from Mac. Stop by the range later. Got something new for you to try. Daniel smirked. Old habits, they never fully died. Be there. He pocketed the phone as Ava appeared in the hallway, wiping dust off her hands. You good? She asked. Daniel nodded, stepping forward, pulling her into a hug. Yeah, for the first time in a long damn while. I really am. They stood there a moment, no words, just quiet understanding. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The storm had passed. The battles were done. And in its place, a simple, steady life awaited. Hard earned protected. Unco. unquell because some men, when pushed far enough, didn't break. They rebuilt, stronger, smarter, more dangerous to anyone foolish enough to cross them again. Daniel Walker was that man. The soldier had come home, the father had reclaimed his family, the warrior had won, and the future, finally, was theirs to shape.